Okay, well, hello there to you all. My name's Suzi Bewell, and my contact details are at the bottom of this first slide. So at the end of the presentation, if you want to get in touch with me for any purposes, then please do feel free to drop me an email, and I will share the presentation, the PowerPoint slides and a link to the video recording on my website, which is polyglotlanguages.co.uk. So the purpose of today's webinar is to share with you some top tips for a successful NQT year. So what I'd like to do is to offer you some sound advice. So it's all about putting your best foot forward between now and September. And what I want to do in this session essentially is cover those topics there. So behaviour management briefly, reward systems, the all-important one for those of you who haven't yet secured your first post, thinking about applying for jobs. Obviously we are in quite unusual circumstances at the moment, as you all are working from home instead of your classroom. So what to expect from the rest of this year, and this will differ from institution to institution. I'd like to share with you some thoughts on how to keep up with your continued professional development, and then I'm going to finish with where to go for the best high quality free MFL resources. So hoping that you have got perhaps a little bit more time than usual to maybe explore some of those resources at your leisure. Okay. So a few opening thoughts. So what are we now? We're in April, and October half term probably seems like a lifetime away. And it's normal for you as an NQT after a long summer break to be feeling a mixture of excitement. You can't wait to get into your classroom and to meet your classes, and also a little bit of anticipation, maybe a little bit of anxiety. And I just wanted to say, to start things off, that this is perfectly normal. Having run the PGCE for Modern Languages at the University of York, I've met many, many trainees who have found themselves in the same situation that you will find yourself in. And so I just wanted to really reassure you. Some of you will have already secured posts, some of you will be looking at securing a post in the coming weeks and months. So you'll be thinking, the questions at the bottom, you'll be thinking, how are your new classes going to take to you? What's that relationship, that rapport going to be like? What will their behaviour be like? Will they be well behaved, or will there be a few rogues in there? And how are you going to maintain the enthusiasm and energy that you need to make it to October half term? So I wanted to focus to start with on rules and routines, and I'm sure some of this is really just a recap of some of the content that you've covered already in your university sessions. So for me, a key ingredient to a successful academic year is about establishing good rules and routines, and I think that really needs to be done in the first few weeks of term, literally from your first lesson. And I would suggest considering spending part of one of the first lessons jointly setting up your rules. I think the fact that they help you to come up with the rules gives the children, the students, a sense of ownership. And I think it will also help you massively if you are having to issue any rule reminders. So there's just an example there at the bottom. This is purely fictional, of course, but for example, if you did have a year 8 who were a little bit challenging, you could say to them, we agreed at the start of the year 8 that we would respect each other's views. Those of you who are choosing not to adhere to this rule know what the repercussions will be, and obviously if you've set those rules up together, then they won't come as a big surprise to anybody. At the moment, I currently teach across 2 schools, so I teach up to year 8. So how you pitch your rules will very much be dependent on the age of your learners. I know most of you will probably be going on to teach in secondary and up to A level, so these may need tweaking. But you will probably notice from my classroom rules that they are all worded positively. So it's not about what I don't want them to do, it's about what I want them to be like and how I do want them to behave. So I could have said, no bad manners, but I think asking them to be polite is being a bit more directed. My year 3 class, for example, find it very challenging to stay in their seats for more than 5 minutes at a time. So staying seated is a big one for me. You might want to add and change those according to what the issues are, and of course according to what your students suggest you might put on there. So I'm going to pause just for a second, and Cam, I think, is going to pull up any questions and any comments in the chat. So what kinds of rules and routines have you personally witnessed on your placement so far? And what do you feel has worked well for you personally? So maybe Cam, if you could pick those up, that would be brilliant.
Of course I will, no problem. Okay, so from Karine there, we have less is more. We have from Laura McGrady, I implemented a praise points chart in year 8, and if they got 10 points, 10 praise points from me, they got a treat, so the incentivization. Speak as much French and Spanish as you can from Niall. Raffle tickets from Gemma. Oh, very active chat. All students having their planners on their tables, going to classroom, opening their books and doing the starter activity from Cynthia. Printed starter worksheets, settle them in. Whatever you use it consistently from Elizabeth there. Some really good points, everybody.
Brilliant. And routine, I think, is really coming through there. I think having a kind of format. So my lessons, I would say, are not formulaic in the sense that the students don't really ever know quite what I'm going to be studying with them or how we're going to be learning. But they always know that there's going to be what I call bell work, or an activity for them to get on with as soon as they get into the lesson, because then there's no time wasted, and that kind of eliminates any opportunities for misbehaviour. And also, if someone comes into the room a little bit late, or they're back from a music lesson or wherever they've been, they see all of the other students working conscientiously, and you don't really need to even say anything or raise the issue. You just sort of point at what they need to get on with, and it avoids for any confrontation. So that's great. Thank you for sharing those. There'll be more opportunities for questions and for you to share your own thoughts and ideas. This isn't just about my ideas today. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you now about your choice of language and the language of choice. And what I mean about that is making sure, even with the most difficult of classes, that you remember to praise and reward those who do stick to the rules. We all have met, I'm sure, on one of our placements, the notorious staff room moaners, the mood hoovers, as I sometimes call them. Oh yeah, that year 8 class or that year 9 class, they're so unruly, they never listen to a word I say. And what I would suggest is try not to get involved in those kinds of conversations. Try and sit yourselves away from the classroom, from the staff room moaners, because it's just going to bring you down, and you really want to try and keep that fire and that enthusiasm. So I would suggest that if you do have any difficult classes, you don't necessarily turn the blame on the students. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes. You don't know you might not necessarily know what's going on at home or in other lessons, or personal issues that the students might be having. Normally there is a really good reason for poor behaviour. Sometimes it's attention seeking, sometimes it's because there are issues going on at home that we couldn't even begin to explain. So my advice would be to take action and to ask yourself, put yourself in the centre of it, and saying, what do I personally need to do to help those learners to better understand what my expectations are? You've set the rules jointly, they've come up with them alongside you, you've agreed on them. And so if it isn't quite working to plan, then shuffling things around, talking to colleagues. In your NQT, you should have a mentor. You should probably be linked to somebody on the senior management team. So I would suggest that you use those avenues of support. Don't see it as a failing. Don't see it as, they're not going to think that I can cope. You've just been through a training year, and it takes a good number of years to really mold yourself into the teacher that you're going to become. So even in your NQT year, as you would in your teacher training year, do hook up with those people whose responsibility and job it is to support and coach you and mentor you. So again, another top tip, really consistently targeting those who don't behave. Literally from lesson 1, following the school or departmental policy on behaviour management, and I think somebody raised this in the last section, implementing it consistently. That's with your old classes and your new classes. So if you are fortunate enough to be teaching next year in the school where you've done one of your placements, then obviously some of the classes might be new to you, but it could be that you're teaching classes that you actually had dealings with on your placement. And it's about, you know, still making sure that you are consistent, and probably even more so with classes who knew you as a trainee, because I think that status of trainee teacher compared with established teacher can also change the dynamic considerably. Fairness, I think, if you ask children, is one of the qualities that they most appreciate from their teachers. So let the learners know that you are not punishing them directly, but it's their unacceptable behaviour that you are targeting. And I think it's what you owe to your well-behaved learners. They are rewarded for behaving as you would expect, but I think it's also important to make sure that everyone concerned knows that if you don't adhere to the rules, then there are sanctions to be had. So the key message I would say is that if you choose to behave this way, then I will do X, Y, or Z, and X, Y, or Z might be writing your planner, it might be contact parents, it might be put into detention, it will be whatever the sanctions procedure is in your particular setting. I hope that makes sense. So making it clear to the learner that they are consciously choosing to misbehave and that this has consequences, and at the same time not being so consumed by the odd pesky learner that you forget to reward good behaviour, effort and attitudes too. So catch them being good, catch them doing what you want them to do. So little pause again, over to Cam with the question. So what behaviour systems have you witnessed on placement, and what has worked for you personally? So a little bit of reflection time.
Okay. Green ticks and red ticks. Somebody had a ready to learn policy, I believe. Praise 5 times as much as you sanction, which is a very good one there. Having the behaviour team collecting pupils who refuse to leave the room, so actually working with the wider school network.
Yeah.
Write down names on board for praising and good contribution, which is really, really positive. A warning posted.
Sorry, not just writing names on the board for students who aren't behaving or following the rules. That's really nice. Maybe with a smiley face.
Absolutely. I think positive reinforcement does real wonders. Behaviour systems in planners, more visual things than things like class charts. Writing learners' names on board for good work and following rules, followed up with achievement points. So lots of positive reinforcement that we're seeing. Talking to students at the end of the lesson privately, i.e. not giving them any kudos for being the bad one, which is very good.
Yeah, and that takes a certain amount of restraint on your part, because I think sometimes, particularly if we're tired, we've been up till late planning lessons, you know, we've put our heart and soul into the lesson, and somebody for whatever reason is kind of ruining that learning environment. I think that's really important. So yeah, not giving them the time or the space that perhaps they are desiring. The other thing on the praise, I think about the amount of praise compared to reprimand is a really interesting one. All I would say with that is just make sure that you are very specific. So I think if you are just giving out praise willy-nilly and it's just très bien or, you know, muy bien or whatever it might be, I think you need, where possible, to try and be specific. And it shouldn't necessarily, should I say, be just about grades or attainment. It could be that someone has tried harder than they did the previous lesson. If you have had to pull somebody up about their behaviour, just a quiet word with them, say, look, I'm really impressed with how you've handled yourself today. You've really taken on board my advice. Those sorts of conversations really do go a long way.
And we're seeing some really nice things as well for actually letting family know. So sending postcards home for praise and positive phone calls. So just keep them in the loop and let them know how their children are doing in the classroom.
Absolutely. I think one of the scholars mentioned the idea of having teams, and that's something I've found. I should say I'm secondary trained, but I've sort of fallen into primary teaching over the years and now teach a little bit of both phases. But certainly when I was teaching in Key Stage 4, with older students who don't necessarily buy into the whole stickers and stamps and you know, the kind of traditional reward systems that schools sometimes buy into, is the idea of class teams. And I think that that sense of giving out points for behaviour, for effort, for homework, for positive attitude to lessons, to saying something in the lesson if it's someone who's quite reluctant. What I would generally do is start with 100 points, so they've already got a kind of starting point, and I would add points and also take points away depending on the above mentioned criteria. And what I feel personally works really well with this system is the kind of peer pressure element. So some of the students, in fairness, aren't too worried about what Madame Buell thinks, and so if I give them a demerit or a negative, or I write in their planner, they're not particularly concerned. But if it is a question of letting their teammates down and knowing that their own individual performance is going to have an impact on their teammates and their teammates' points, I think that can sometimes be really, really powerful. Far less teacher-learner confrontation, I would suggest as well, because the learners would often encourage in their own unique way their teammates to shape up. So if you are in a group and you find that one of your group mates, your teammates in your particular team isn't doing their bit to gain points, or is actually actively engaging in behaviours that mean that points are deducted, then it tends to be the students who help you as the teacher to try and get things back on track. So I think that's quite an interesting one. So are there any other sort of reward systems? One I was thinking of, which I didn't actually include in the presentation, which is used in one of my schools, is Class Dojo. Has anybody had any experience of using any online or sort of web-based reward systems, or anything else that you found particularly successful?
Whilst we're just waiting for people to answer that as well, we got a couple of questions about teams. So could students choose their own teams, and how many students would you recommend being in a team, for example?
It's a really good point. I think it will really be very much dependent on your class, and I think you will know your classes much better than I do. There's nothing to say that you can't switch the classes around if you give them permission to sort out their own groups initially, and it doesn't quite work. Then you could always sort of switch them up every half term. I would generally try and make sure there are a couple of people from friendship groups in each group. I think that tends to work. And then if they physically have to move around the room in order to work together, then that means that they're working with someone who they feel confident speaking the target language with. The way I often did it was give them a francophone country name. So I would have Guadeloupe, Martinique, France, La Suisse. In GCSE classes that I've taught, normally speaking, because of options, I would probably have no more than about 20, 25 students. So I would suggest maybe groups of no more than 6, just to kind of keep that manageable, really. I hope that helps.
Fantastic. And we've got a few ideas for online points and reward systems. So Laura and Caroline use epraise.co.uk, and the points can be used in the school shop. We also have EduLink and class charts in the classroom as well. Many thanks, Phoebe, for that. So those two seem to be quite useful, ePraise and EduLink.
Fantastic. And I think once you do secure your first post, it would be really good in this time that you have in the lead up to starting in September to get to grips with some of those tools. So asking those questions, perhaps on interview, albeit an online interview, what systems are in place for rewards and sanctions? How do you find those work? How do the students respond to them? They all show a real kind of vested interest in how the school operates, and obviously behaviour management is at the centre of any well-functioning school, as we know.
And we've got some good ideas as well. In my second placement school, my mentor had a system of giving pupils baguettes. 5 baguettes would add up to an achievement point, which is very on brand for languages there. Students keeping track of their own progress via tallies, which is very interesting as well. So they actually manage their own progress.
Fantastic. And again, with some classes like I've taught, I can imagine that working brilliantly. With other classes, I think that they would probably try and rig that. So I think, as I say, your learners, what will work. in my experience, the class dojo points, particularly with younger learners, so if you are perhaps going into primary teaching or you're teaching lower key stage 3, I think it will be a very different system that you might consider using for key stage 3 learners and key stage 2 learners than you would perhaps for key stage 4 and 5. I think I think quite often it is trial and error, but if there is a school system or a departmental system in place, then I would suggest that you use that as a starting point. But just because you're the new kid on the block, you're the new person in the department, doesn't mean to say that your colleagues wouldn't be interested in hearing about the kinds of behaviour management strategies and resources that you have used on placement, and perhaps even adopting those as a department if they feel that that works better than the system that they're currently trialling.
One last one as well, just to highlight, is working towards a class reward at the end of the lesson. So, for example, a song of the week in the target language worked well, so fun end to the lesson.
Definitely,
really nice.
And you will find that there are certain songs. I have to say the expression "chanter comme une casserole" was made for me. I can't particularly sing, but I love singing. I love music, and I find that the children in my lessons do love music as well, especially if it's a bit cheesy or a bit catchy. So there will be earworm songs that they will ask you to play over and over again. And I think if you can use that as a character dangle, then great, good on you. Okay, so I'm going to move on unless there are any more questions, Cam.
I'll just have a quick look now. Some final ones. We had Bravo and Arriba, which students get for attainment in lessons. 10 Bravos and Arribas is 1 praise point. Very nice. And Mentor gives stickers adding up to merits for effective self-marking in books. So yes, some great ideas, and just to let everybody know, we will send the transcript of the chat around the network for sure. So when we see all of these ideas here, you'll be able to get inspiration from your colleagues also on the call, because there's some fantastic things coming through.
Yeah, that's great that we can we can have a version of that. So thank you, Cam. So I'm just going to move on now to start thinking about applying for jobs. And I think part of my aim as well, which I didn't necessarily share from the outset, is really just to allay any concerns or worries that you might have. I'm not going to use the word, well, if I say it, then I'm talking nonsense, but I was going to say, I'm not going to use the word unprecedented, but I just have. But we are in really challenging, unusual times. And I think I too am going to be looking for a new post for September. So I am in the same situation as many of you, thinking, how am I going to navigate this when I can't physically get into a school to teach? You know, what's the interview procedure going to be like? Are schools still going to be recruiting? Are there going to be less jobs? And I think really what I want to say from the outset is that there's lots and lots of support through your contacts in the British Council, the Language Teacher Scholarship Programme, through your mentors in school and at university, but also lots and lots of online support that you can access from home. So I'm sure most of you are aware of the new teachers section on tes.com. But also The Guardian has a fantastic section on their website called the Teacher Network. And I've just pulled out a link there, which you can access when I send you the direct PowerPoint. So there are quite a lot of hyperlinked sections in here to a survival guide. So some really useful tips to complement what I'm going to share with you today. One of my main tips I would suggest when applying for jobs is to ask lots of questions about support package. And I think speaking to colleagues in the world of teacher training, this has never been more important. You need to make sure that next year you get what you are entitled to. Most of you, I think all of you, will be associated with a union of some sort. I am the union rep in one of my schools currently. And I think it's really important to make sure that you are clear from the outset, once you've accepted a position, that this is the support that I get as a newly qualified teacher. This is the person who I report to as my senior manager. This is the person who's going to be allocated to me as my mentor. And so you absolutely do benefit from the support that you are expected to, and perhaps more. Just move forward one. So a little bit, just a kind of slight diversion, if you like, about what to expect from the rest of this year. So most of you, I would imagine, unless you have already got to that point in your course, will still have assignments perhaps at master's level to complete. So that will certainly give you something to fill your time. From what I can gather, speaking to some of your tutors online, most of them are in the process of collating some tasks which they're about to set you, or may well have already set you, to help you to meet or further develop your teacher standards. So this will be, unfortunately, in the place of actual teaching. As I say, we are in a very strange situation in that you aren't going to be able to go, or it's looking very unlikely that you are going to be able to go back into school next term to actually physically teach your lessons. Some of you may well be asked to assist with online teaching and learning, or to have give access to resources that will help to teach the students that were in your classes. But unfortunately, we need to think creatively in this time about ways in which we can help you as your tutors in developing your standards further, and making sure that as many of you as possible obviously pass the course, and that's in everybody's interest to do so. So I would suggest during this unusual time that you are very proactive. I think that's probably my key word for this afternoon. Proactively seek out other opportunities. If you click on the hyperlinks within the slides, they will take you to either websites where you can do further reading. There are a number of online courses that you can get certification for. So for example, for special needs, there is I think it's Future Learn course, which is all about teaching students with dyslexia in the languages classroom. Many of you will be in schools where there are a good number of teaching assistants. If you haven't had the opportunity yet to work with a teaching assistant, or you think that that's something that would help you to fulfill certain of your teacher standards, then maybe reading around that topic and relating that to your teacher standards documents, so that you've got evidence of what you are doing in the place of actually physically working with a teaching assistant. Certainly at York, we had a process which in the summer term was called enrichment. And this is really you taking the time to think about, even early on in your career, about what your 5-year plan might be. Is that to become a head of department? Is that to become a second in department? Is it just simply that you want to work in the classroom and that you're at your happiest when you're with the students? But what specific areas of teaching light you up? So you are first and foremost a languages teacher, but are there other aspects of the curriculum, whether it be extracurricular, whether it be perhaps offering another subject alongside languages? What is it that lights you up about being in school, and trying to be well informed in that particular area, so that if any opportunities do come up in your school placements, then you are in a good position to say, look, I might not have experience, but I've been reading around this particular topic, I've engaged in a webinar, I've done some online training, I'd really like you to consider me for that post. So just to be thinking ahead, really. Accessing free CPD and training via webinars like this one, and there's a few slides actually a bit later on, where I will I'll highlight your attention to where you can do just that, where you can sign up for some of the free webinars that are going on at the moment. Job applications is obviously a big one. Having a draft letter ready, as deadlines can be very tight. Having been on the receiving end of some of these job application, sort of reference requests, I can tell you as a tutor at York, I would quite often receive a reference request on a Tuesday for an interview that was taking place on the Wednesday, and I wouldn't have necessarily received the trainee teacher's letter of application. I wouldn't even be aware that they had that applied for that job. So I think out of respect, and also for planning and time purposes for your tutors, do let them know well in advance. As soon as you get word that you've been invited to an interview, let them have a copy of your letter of application, let them know about the school setting, let them know about your latest achievements, so that they can really, I've said this, that they can sell you, so that they have the best opportunity they can to big you up, to talk about all the great things that you've done on placement, and to give you the best chance in their reference to be successful. And I think the last point on this slide is about planning a restful summer. I think by the looks of it, none of us are going to be going anywhere anytime soon. So taking the time where possible to refuel and refresh, obviously preparing some lessons, making sure that you're ready for September. But I think it's that kind of trusty expression, you can't pour from an empty cup. You've got to make sure that you have, you know, that you've got plenty of reserves, really, because that first term, when you're in your own classroom on your own with a much higher teaching timetable, much more hours of contact time, you will need to dig deep for energy, as I'm sure most of you will know. So another link that I was alerted to actually through the Teacher Training Forum is via TES. So if you click on that link there, you will find that our colleagues at TES are offering free ITT sessions. So as you can see in the slide, free access to high quality sessions, a range of content suitable for primary and secondary, access for the academic year until the summer. So that's going to be online certainly for the next couple of months, and additional tutor support, which is obviously more for your tutors. So that's also something that you might want to investigate further. So applying for jobs. I've highlighted at the top there sample letters. I'm always a little bit loath to share sample letters with trainees because experience tells me that quite often students will just rejig it slightly, and then you end up as an employer receiving 20 almost identical letters. So what I would suggest makes for a good letter is that it is personalised. So obviously have a draft letter which includes all of your achievements, all of the things that you feel make you suitable for any given post, but making sure that each time you apply for a letter, you know, that you change all of the details about the school, that you look like you are approaching the application with an informed choice. You know, you're choosing them as much as you want them to choose you. And have you met the criteria? Often in the application pack, and sometimes this is clearly ignored by student teachers, there is a list of what is desirable and essential. And if you use the acronym ISPARK, so the I being it's all about me, what have I done, who am I? The S being specific, the P, the people, who have you worked with, who has supported you, who has helped you? A, what actions you took to achieve your goals? R, the results that you gained, and K, the knowledge that you gained over the course of the year. So even when it comes to perhaps negative experiences, what learning you have taken from that and how you're going to take that forward. As I said earlier, make sure you send your letter to your referees so that they are fully informed. And there are just a couple of links there at the bottom. One from jobs.ac.uk, which is specifically about filling out an application form for a teaching job. Annoyingly, most schools have their own individual application forms, so it's often not just a case of drafting a letter and being able to send that off. You might have to include some of that letter in their own personalised application form, which I know is time consuming, but as I say, you want them to choose you, but equally don't just apply for the first job that comes along. Think about whether you actually want to work in that school, whether it's a good fit for you. Another link there from the Guardian Teacher Network about writing award-winning job application letters, and then a final one there about careers advice from the TES. This article was brought to my attention, so it's a few years old now, but looking for a teaching job and how to avoid a dysfunctional school. Unfortunately, as a tutor, I have heard a number of, not horror stories, that's the wrong word, but a number of stories of trainees where their NQT year hasn't been as successful as perhaps it could have been, where they haven't received a sufficient amount of support, and where unfortunately in some cases they've decided that actually teaching isn't for them. And I think, you know, having been in this profession for over 20 years, that breaks my heart, because some people clearly could stay in the profession if they had just found, as I say, the right kind of fit school for them. So you might be interested in reading that article just to get some tips and hints on what to look for when it comes to the kind of culture of the school that you are applying to. Good news is that there are lots of jobs to be had. Cameron and I had a conversation yesterday. I did a bit of a search this morning. So in terms of MFL, there are 108 jobs at the moment on the TES website. There are 134 jobs posted for teacher of French. That could be worldwide. So those of you perhaps thinking of working overseas, I'm not sure whether that will be for September, but who knows. Teacher of German, good news in that there are 51 jobs. That's really positive for the Germanists out there, and 131 jobs for the Hispanists. So I think that's a really positive picture, and I hope that that inspires you, that just because we are on lockdown doesn't mean that the jobs are going to go away. This is the busiest time of year for job adverts, so do keep your eye on the TES website, Guardian jobs, etc. There's also, some of you may well know, on Facebook, a group called MFL Teaching Posts, current vacancies. You can see there from the image, there are 3,000 members. So it is a private group, so you'll have to request access. But just there, you can see a lovely friend and colleague, Nadine Chadier, who works at Saint-Jérôme Bilingual Primary School in Harrow. They are currently recruiting, and so if you are someone who's secondary trained but perhaps would like to work in the London area in a primary bilingual setting, then that might well be the post for you. So do check out that group. It's well worth just seeing what's out there. So if there is anyone here who's at St Mary's, you will know Glenys very well, Glenys Pye. I asked for some feedback, if you like, from colleagues in the teacher training world, and Glenys's quote, I think, is really, really to the point. It's important to prepare very thoroughly the questions that they will ask their interviewers, and to include, for example, something that around the support offered for NQTs, as I said earlier, how or whether the school feels that this might be enhanced given the current situation, as well as questions which might be likely to allow the trainees to get a better feel for how well the ethos of the school aligns with their own values. I can't stress enough that if you are on interview, albeit online, and you just don't get a great gut feeling about the school, about the management, about whether you would fit, you do at any point in the interview have the right to withdraw from your application, to withdraw from the interview process, and just to thank them in a very professional manner and say, I'm really grateful for this opportunity. I just feel, all things considered, that this school or this job isn't for me, but thank you for your time. And it does take a certain boldness to do that, but that is common practice, and it won't go against you. It's much better than finding yourself in a situation where perhaps you are offered the job and then you are backed into a corner because you're panicking about your opportunities for September. You accept it and then you end up regretting it throughout the whole of your NQT year. So just to bear that in mind, really. And then Joanne from Manchester Metropolitan, apparently they've done a case study at Manchester Met, which was good to see how a Skype interview can be done. So I'm guessing that Skype, Zoom, those sorts of tools are going to be the way forward in terms of how interviews are conducted in the coming weeks and months. Thinking about practical things such as lighting, technical issues, background, noise levels. My cat earlier decided to come and say hello when Cameron and I were having a test run. You know, just making sure that you're in a nice quiet room, no distractions, hopefully no kids running around if you've got children like I have. Just bearing those things in mind, really. And then also from Joanne, I also read a good article on using different coloured cue cards for questions and potential answers. So although you're going to be online, you're going to have your desk space around you. If it helps you to have cue cards or notes, bullet points, then obviously that's something to think about as well. And then finally, reports from students at MMU have noted that they have still been asked to plan a lesson and the resources and to talk through it. So you probably won't be given the opportunity to physically teach the lesson. I don't know how that would quite work in the current climate, but be prepared to have to teach a lesson. So maybe think about, if you're given the opportunity to teach any lesson of your choice, then obviously you could start getting creative with that now and think about one of the best lessons that you taught so far.
Could I just pop in very quickly from the chat, Susie?
Of course you can.
We've got a question from one of our scholars here, from Maita. How can we have an impression of the school with just knowing one or two people in an online interview? And Karine has followed on about not being able to visit, not clear how to deduce much from their internet presence, for example. Do you have
Yeah.
any suggestions or any tips for that?
Well, I was going to say the first place to go, obviously, will be the school website, and to have a little look at a little look at how that's presented, what it says about the school, if they have a core statement, for example, if it's a faith school, whether that sits well with you, if you want to work in a faith school, or if you would prefer to work in a non-denominational school. I would guess, although I could be wrong, that you will still be interviewed by more than one person. So I would suggest, if it's for a languages post, that it would be one or more linguists, because you're likely to be tested in one or more of your languages, and also a member or two of senior management. So I don't think that the makeup of the interview will be dramatically different to what you would expect on a traditional face-to-face interview, although some of you may well have had interviews. You might be able to interject there and tell me that I'm wrong. So I think it is tricky, but I think I would suggest that, again, you go on your gut reaction. It's a very unusual situation that we find ourselves in, but I think the main questions around support offered, how many colleagues are there in the department? Are you going to be surrounded by colleagues who are well established, whose ethos is to share, to contribute for the greater good of the department? I think that they would probably be the things that I would be most interested to find out about. And also how they're going to take your CPD, your professional development, forward. What are they going to offer you in terms of further support? Because remember, your PGCE, your teacher training year, is only the very start of your professional development. So you should, by the end of your teacher training year, have a document. I'm not sure what that document's called these days, but where you leave with a sense of where there are perhaps areas that are still to be further developed, and think about, asking if there are opportunities either within the school or the trust or externally that you could benefit from, to make sure that you have the best NQT year possible. So I don't know how well I've answered that question, but because it's not something that I've ever experienced before, it's tricky, and it won't be the same as physically visiting a building and seeing the children there. So you might have to get creative about finding out, maybe on Twitter, asking colleagues if they know anything about the schools, just trying to make as informed a choice as possible, really.
Brill, thank you. We do have a couple more questions in the chat as well. Do you want me to ask them now, or shall we wait until?
Yeah, perfect. No, go away. Go fire ahead.
Okay. So got one question here. How much should we prioritise our language combination? Mine being Spanish/German is quite a difficult one.
Okay, so with Spanish and German, I would suggest that you look predominantly, when you are searching for schools, at whether they are language colleges or what we would call ex-languages colleges. So ex in the sense that the government and Specialist Schools and Academies Trust in the past would fund specialisms, so languages being one of those specialisms. I worked for a number of years in a specialist language college. The difference these days is that obviously the government funding for those specialisms no longer exists, but some of the schools still continue to call themselves specialist language colleges. And what you will find with the combination of Spanish and German is that if it is a language college, there is a better chance of the school offering a mixture of languages, albeit French, Spanish and German, or maybe just Spanish and German. I think those of you who have engaged in subject knowledge enhancement courses will now begin to see why your tutors were really we're really adamant that that's something that you should do prior to starting the course, because certainly those of you with unusual combinations, or I dare to say that German is unfortunately a lesser taught language these days. So I think it's being creative, selling yourself with your other language, absolutely. It might be that you have to take a Spanish post and run a German club and maybe try and squeeze German in and encourage them to offer German at a later stage. But I think there are always ways in which you can use all of your languages. But when you do have an unusual combination, you might not have as many schools to choose from, unfortunately.
Brill, thank you very much. Quite a really, really good active chat here. We've got some great questions. Next one, we've got, if we don't find jobs in secondary schools, could we do primary as part of NQT?
Oh, now that's a good question. I would have to check with my colleagues in initial teacher training. My gut feeling is no. I think because your certificate that you will have at the end of your PGCE, I'm imagining for all of you will be that you are secondary trained in one or more modern foreign languages, will mean that your NQT year also has to be done in a secondary setting. That's not to say that further down the line you might, as I have done, go into primary teaching. I would kind of offer up the caveat there in that there are very few state schools, unfortunately, who have the finances to support either a native speaker or a specialist teacher in languages. So the posts in primary are few and far between, unfortunately. But yeah, that's certainly something that you could consider going forward. But my feeling is, and I could be wrong, I'll look this up and get back to you. But I think that because you are trained in secondary, to achieve your full qualified teacher status, you would need to complete at least 12 months in a secondary environment.
Well, thank you. Got a question here as well about the scheme, the interview process. Is there a different one for those with disabilities regarding the time or the deadline in your experience?
Oh, that is a really interesting question, and not one that I've ever been asked before. I think if you need support in terms of a disability, perhaps like dyslexia, I would suggest that you contact the school. Normally there is an admin email address, so if you felt that you needed further support with the actual form filling or the formalities of completing the application form, then I would suggest that you contact the school administration directly. In terms of accessibility and how the interview would be conducted, I haven't personally worked with any trainees where that has been an issue that's been raised. So I think all that you can do really is to flag that up with the individual school. Again, my feeling would be that if you needed extra preparation time, or if you a bit like examinations for students that we ourselves personally teach, that sometimes there's an extra time allocation for certain scenarios. So I think that may well be worth flagging up with each individual school, and I guess they will have their own systems and procedures. So I'm sorry I can't be more specific on that one.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. Got a good amount of questions in here. Do you want to carry on with the questions, or
I'll carry on for a couple more slides, and then we can take plenty more questions at the end. I think Cameron said we're due to finish around 6:30, but I'm more than happy to extend the webinar as long as there are questions to answer. So please don't feel rushed. So far, CPD and support. So taking personal control of CPD is really important. I think obviously those of you who are listening in who are British Council scholars, you've already been super proactive, not only in acquiring the language teacher trainee scholarship, which you should really be commending yourselves upon, but also the involvement that you've had already in the early stages of your teaching career with CPD. So the links that you've had with the Association for Language Learning, those of you who were at Language World, who I perhaps met, your connections now with the British Council, perhaps the e-twinning teams. And I wanted to also say, don't forget the unions. As a union rep, certainly there are conferences specially for new and recently qualified teachers. When I was a bit younger than I am now, I attended a really great one over a weekend in Newcastle. All expenses were covered. We were in a lovely hotel for the weekend, loads of really, really useful sessions with really, really impressive speakers. So do have a look on your union website, again, while you've got a bit of downtime, perhaps over the Easter holidays, and have a think about what they might also be able to offer you. Probably less subject specific, if I'm honest, but maybe more along the lines of what we were saying earlier about courses that will help you to enhance what you already know in terms of teaching children with English as an additional language. There are also opportunities for teachers from other communities within the teaching world. So there will be forums for LGBT professionals, teachers from different racial backgrounds, etc. So do investigate that. And then those of you who aren't already on Twitter or Facebook, I found these to be invaluable over the last few weeks. I think mainly for keeping myself sane, but also just coming up with fresh and fun new ideas for lessons. What's great about Twitter and Facebook is that it's free. If I can find a resource for free and adapt it, I'd much rather do that than pay for it, if I'm honest. And I think we all know that in most schools, most languages departments, there is a distinct lack of funds. So I think it's partly about being on there, a bit like the lurker in the kitchen at a party, seeing what's going on, taking resources and so on. And then when you grow in confidence, being that person who then offers their resources out, and not being too precious about whether they're perfect or whether you've made the odd spelling mistake. I think people are just incredibly grateful that trainees like yourselves who are for the most part, you've got that fire in your belly, you're new to the profession, you're not jaded, you're not that classroom owner, hopefully you never will be, and that you are, that you've got lots and lots of great new ideas, and maybe are slightly more au fait with technology or other aspects of teaching languages that maybe some of your more experienced colleagues aren't. So it's the idea of give and take, really. I love the sense of community on Twitter and Facebook. I know Twitter, certainly over the last few days after the announcements of Boris Johnson's hospitalisation, there's been a lot of talk about how there's some hideous trolling, and that Twitter isn't a very nice place. And I think that can be said for most aspects of the internet in general. It can be a great place, and it can also be a place that harbours, all sorts of terrible, terrible things. So I think certainly from my experiences, Twitter and Facebook have been really positive. And so if you're having a bad day, or you are having a general problem or concern, you can share it with your followers, you can get advice, you can get help. I've put on there, just underneath that section, a link to my personal Twitter. So if ever you need to get in touch with me and you are a keen tweeter, then please do tweet me at Suzi Bewell. And then just a couple of hashtags there, which I generally use. So if you're not quite sure who to follow, you're quite new to the whole world of Twitter, rather than kind of starting out with no followers and not really having a clue what to do, I would suggest in the search bar on Twitter that you type in one or more of those hashtags, and that will bring up all of the posts that your fellow languages teachers and trainees are tweeting about, which will generally be language specific. And then you can start to look at who tweets things that you kind of that resonate with you, that you like the sound of, and you can start following each of them mutually. And then at the bottom of the page, which you may or may not be aware of, there is a group on Facebook specifically for secondary languages teachers. That's called Secondary MFL Matters. You just have to answer a few very simple questions about who you are and why you want to join the group. And the same for those of you who are maybe thinking of going into primary, or maybe work in a setting where one of the expectations on you for the coming year is to maybe do some primary languages teaching as well, which is super exciting. Many of you will know Steve Smith, he of FrenchTeacher.net. Steve has very kindly, over the last couple of weeks since we've been on lockdown, put online on his YouTube channel some presentations. He may well have come into your university setting to deliver training face-to-face before the lockdown, but I would certainly highly recommend his sessions, very bite-sized chunks. I don't think any of them are more than about 20 minutes long. If that link, for whatever reason, doesn't take you to his YouTube channel, if you just Google Steve Smith CPD and search on YouTube, you'll find all of the sessions that you need. I think for now there are about 8 or 10, if I'm not mistaken. And then just last week, I delivered a free session for Linguiscope, all about building cultural capital and independent learning during lockdown. That was attended by over 400 teachers, teacher trainers. This evening I've just attended, before I came online here, a session with the lovely Sue Cave, who delivered a session around teaching phonics, which will be available to watch again on the Linguoscope Vimeo channel. And then I've just posted below the links here. Next week, sorry, this coming week on Friday, you have got Jennifer Wozniak, who is going to be offering a session called We Are All in the Same Boat. And then next week, I think these are always on Tuesdays and Fridays, we have got the lovely Isabel Jones, my very favourite Francunian, should I say. She's a French lady who currently lives in Manchester. She's going to be talking about translation and how motivating translation tasks can be acted in and out of the classroom. So they're definitely sessions that you can watch again, or that you can sign up for using that link there, linguoscope.com/training. And all you need to do is give your email details, and a bit like this evening, you'll be sent a link to a Zoom presentation. Shall we pause, Cameron, for any more questions, and I'll keep going with the where to go for high quality resources?
Sounds great, yes. So going back up to where we left off, so in terms of colleges where there's only a sixth form, so year 11 to 13, for example, or maybe year 12 and 13, these are fewer and farther between, are they, in your experience, Susie?
Yeah, I think the middle school system across the country is pretty much dying a death. I think they're often being replaced by multi-academy trusts, whereby schools are combining forces, and where a school perhaps historically had a setup where it was kind of upper key stage 2 perhaps to year 9, and then the higher end of the school was maybe from year 10 through to sixth form. I think they certainly are, that they still exist. There are still some up and down the country, but again, when you are doing your research, my advice would be, for a first teaching post, try and get the whole age and ability range, because then whatever placement whatever job you go on to from there, you've got some really good solid experience that you can then build upon. My first teaching job was in a school that was in one of those kind of middle school type systems, and I initially didn't teach year 7 and 8. The school that I taught in started from year 9 and went up to sixth form. Fortunately for me, I was only in that job for 3 years, and I moved on to a language college in York, where I then obviously taught year 7 through to sixth form. So thankfully that didn't go against me, if you like, but certainly where possible, try and get that experience, 11 to 16 minimum, and then obviously if the school has an associated sixth form or college, then if you are given that opportunity to teach sixth form, which you may or may well not be in your first year of teaching, it really just depends on how the department is set up.
Brill, thank you very much. We've got a question here as well. We talked about teaching multiple languages, but is there any advice that you could offer in going into an interview if you're only teaching one language? Is there any advice to maybe help make you stand out, even if you're not teaching a series of languages, for example?
Sure. I mean, I think if you show a willingness to learn other languages, and maybe make it clear that you currently only offer language X. Excuse me. You only offer language X, but that you'd be keen to offer language Y. So it might be that you have a smattering of Latin or German or whatever it might be. I think that willingness to be involved in supporting or running a club will stand you in good stead. And I think, again, where languages teachers come into their own is that we are quite a flexible, adaptable bunch. And so I think what I would probably stress at interview is all of the other things that you can offer. So, for example, I'm a really keen sewer. I'm very excited about the Sewing Bee making a return to TV in the coming weeks. And so I interview said, I'm here first and foremost as languages teacher. I can offer French with a small amount of German. I'd done German to A level, so I ended up teaching predominantly French. I did have some key stage 3 German, which I was a bit nervous about, but which I coped with admirably with the help of really supportive colleagues and friends online who helped me with resources. I also was talked into teaching teaching some Key Stage 3 drama because of the kind of drama role play elements of teaching languages. And, you know, I said on interview that I would be really keen to get involved in trips and exchanges. And then obviously because of my love of all things needlework, you know, could I help to run an after school needlework club? And I think any kind of senior leader worth their salt would probably not turn you down if you are offering to do you know, extra club or society. What I would also say, I'm terribly guilty of this, is don't just be that yes person and say yes to everything. I think, you know, keeping an eye on your reserves, making sure that you are proactive, making sure that you are keeping up with your CPD, but also that, you know, albeit you're very keen to get involved in the wider life of the school, that you've got enough time on your hands to prepare high quality effective lessons. I think that's got to be your key aim, really. So yeah, I think for the purposes of interview, if you can only offer one language, draw on all of your other strengths, all of the other things that you can offer. They will generally ask you if you would be interested in being involved in X or Y or Z. It might be DfE, it might be Charities Commission, it might be last year I somehow got rigged into teaching year 7 and 8 rugby, and if any of you have met me, I'm all of 4'11", with certainly don't have a rugby bill, don't know the first thing about rugby, but I found myself saying yes, that's fine. So, you know, being open to perhaps teaching subjects that you that are a little bit out of your comfort zone.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Yes. Next question we have down is this might be something you've come across in the MFL network, but do you know if private bilingual schools run an NQT induction program, e.g. bilingual French schools?
So the Saint-Jérôme primary that I mentioned earlier, I know certainly are affiliated to the Institut Français. I think they're one of the first Franck Label bilingually recognised primary schools. So essentially what that means is that I think a third, I might have that wrong, a third or more of their curriculum, no, I think it's, let's think, at least 20% of their curriculum has to be delivered in the French language. So that's how they've managed to get the label. So in terms of the whole NQT induction process, I would suggest that you probably contact the school directly. I think again it will vary from school to school, but I think if they are able, if you are keen to apply for a position like that one, albeit in the primary sector, if they are in any way able to support you and make sure that you get your qualified teacher status, albeit in a different setting, then I'm sure that they will be there to support you. I know Nadine is really keen to hear from you know, super talented linguists, and certainly you know, it would be an amazing place to work in.
Fab, thank you. Okay, next question we have down. So once the PGCE is over in June, should we ask the school for their schemes of work and start planning lessons and creating resources to be ready for September, would you say?
So we're talking about the schools that we are going to be moving on to in September. Absolutely. I think the summer, as much as I've said, you know, rest, relax, of course you need to do that, but it is a perfect opportunity once you're, you know, the formalities of your teacher training are over and done with. So for most of you, that will probably be the end of June, beginning of July, to just put together a kind of program, a bit like you would a revision program. You know, what do I need to achieve by September? You know, have I got my teacher planner organised? Have I got my class lists? Have they supplied me with the special educational needs, allergies, information? Have I had an opportunity to either go into school, perhaps not, or to be given access to the online textbooks that I will need? You know, obviously having access to the timetable that you're going to be teaching as soon as possible, so that you can obviously have a better insight into whether you're going to be teaching predominantly Key Stage 3 and 4, or whether you are going to be given the opportunity to teach some A-level classes. So I think it might be worth me collaborating with the other teacher trainers on the ITET forum, which I'm part of, and maybe seeing if jointly we could put together a kind of A to Z list of what you really need to try and acquire in terms of admin and useful documents, you know, how best to spend your summer holidays, really. So I'm more than happy to contribute towards that. I think that would be a really useful thing to offer to you.
I'm sure the scholars would be absolutely over the moon with that. That would be fantastic. Thanks very much for that one as well. Hopefully that answered that question there. We've got quite a broad question here, but do you think the nature of the NQT year is likely to be different to how it is currently, given that we won't have completed as many days on placement as trainees normally have?
I think speaking to your teacher training providers via the forum that I mentioned earlier, we're all really keen to hear from the government sooner rather than later about what their plans are in terms of how, you know, grading of trainees, how we progress from this point onwards. So my ex-ITE lead teacher, Paula Mountford, used to say that the training year is a bit like a birthing process, that you spend 9 years, sorry, not 9 years, that would be a terribly long birthing process, 9 months with your trainees. And at the end of that 9 months, you know, they go off into their own classrooms. But actually, you know, a bit like with a child, you're constantly growing and developing, learning new skills. You know, you'll be tripping into and falling over in certain aspects of your teaching, but then you'll be picked up, you'll be guided, there'll be lots of hand holding, and that's certainly what we hope for you at the British Council in terms of your NQT year, that it's a positive experience. And I think, unfortunately, as I said earlier, sometimes it isn't as positive as it could be. And so it's about involving the right people. And hopefully the government, in their wisdom, will come up with a good, solid plan for how to support those trainees who perhaps would have benefited. I mean, all of you, in honesty, would have benefited from completing your placements in school. There's no argument. There's nothing that will replace, you know, the face-to-face interactions that you would have with your students. But unfortunately, that's not likely to happen between now and the end of your teacher training year. So because we haven't experienced anything like this before, I think, as I say, your trainers are working frantically to try and make sure that you can fulfill those teacher standards in a variety of other creative ways. And although it isn't a perfect scenario, I do think that the government will be fully aware that there will need to be additional support in place for you all in September. Now, whether that support will come directly from your current provider, whether that's Bath Spa, York University, wherever you're training, I'm sure, you know, speaking personally on behalf of the British Council, we will still be there into your NQT year to support you and to continue holding your hand, albeit letting go of your hand a little bit slowly. You know, there are lots of people who are really on your side, who are cheering you on. And so I think really there's not a lot more I can say on that until the government do release a more formal statement. But I think certainly that's the wish of all of your trainers collectively. And I know that we are quite a force of nature when we need to be. So I think if we feel as teacher trainers that the support that is in place from September isn't adequate, then I am sure that the pressure of a collective unit like the different people from different teacher training institutions will certainly be behind you in making sure that what is on offer in terms of support going forward is fair and reasonable, given what you have had to encounter over the last few months.
Absolutely. I think that there's a collective support happening between, as you say, the providers, yourself, Suzi, the British Council. I've noticed John put in the chat there. We have a whole range of British Council resources at britishcouncil.org/school-resources, all free and downloadable as well. So everybody wants to make that transition into the next stage as smooth as possible. So I think that there will be a support for you. It should be if you're able to have that open communication with where you'll be doing your NQT, you should find that support.
Absolutely. And I think coming back to the question earlier about how to spend your summer, you know, don't try and fill from an empty cup. You know, slow and steady wins the race. If you spend, you know, an hour or two a week between now and September looking through the list of resources that are on here. So TES is obviously the most common place for teaching resources, some paid, some free. Varying in degrees of quality. Obviously the British Council, masses and masses of resources, some brilliant language challenges that I've been using myself over the last couple of weeks with my learners. Lightbulb Languages, which is again a great free source of inspiration for all languages teachers. Another one which you may or may not be aware of, languagesresources.co.uk, mflresources.org.uk. Teach It Languages, I believe, is completely free of charge at the moment for all teachers, not just teacher trainers. So there is normally a free section and a kind of premium paid for section, but the people at Teach It Languages, who I think is manned by the lovely folks at AQA, they have made that completely free of charge. So I would suggest that you go on there and download lots and lots of nice resources, you know, thinking ahead to September. The lovely Stephen Fawkes has asked me to flag up some of the resources in the Barry Jones archive on the AWL website. So as members of AWL, you will have access to this area of the website where Barry Jones, who was a remarkable linguist and, you know, real advocate of language learning, has given, permissions have been given to look through all of the back catalogue of his articles and books and so on. And as I mentioned earlier, I did do a free webinar for Linguiscope last week, which was all about cultural capital. And if you click on the link at the bottom there, vimeo.com, or if you just go onto the Linguiscope Vimeo channel, you will be able to see not only my webinar, but all of the saved webinars from the last few weeks that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so couple of freebies for you before we take any more questions. So this one here, if you go to the link at the top, bit.ly/MFL tips, the lovely Stéphane Delron from Linguiscope, in association with the AWL London branch, so that's Helen Myers, they have put together, or they put together last year for an event that they ran, some of you may well have attended, a 12-page booklet with tips and ideas for language teachers and trainees. So there are different ways of using single resources, so lots of time-saving ideas in there, how to use an image collection, different favourite websites, how to plan some easy starter activities. So lots and lots on there that I think you will all find useful. So if you click on that link at the top, or if you just simply go to polyglotlanguages.co.uk, so the address is in the final slide, you will be able to access that immediately after the webinar. So please feel free to go on there. That's you know, that's very kind of the people at Linguiscope and AWL London branch. Okay, so question time. Have you, let's think about the last month or so, have you been on any good CPD courses? Have you attended any of these free or paid for webinars? And what kinds of things would you recommend to each other?
Whilst we're just waiting for them to come through,
Sure.
just have a very quick question about asking schools to include our choice of languages in the timetable for NQT year. Do you know if there's much leverage that you can really have with that if you're able to maybe bring a language to a school for an NQT year maybe?
It's certainly a question for interview. I think generally speaking, when a school advertises, so if they advertise for Spanish with French, the chances are they're looking for someone who has Spanish main and who can maybe offer up to Key Stage 3, possibly Key Stage 4 French. I would suggest that it's always, you know, this is what they're looking for in an ideal world. And I think any school with their salt really will choose the best person on the day itself. So sometimes, you know, this has happened to me. The feedback from an interview has been really, really positive. I know in my heart of hearts that I could have done the job standing on my head, but actually I just wasn't the right person on the day. And it's not to say that I couldn't have done the job brilliantly well, but perhaps the other person or people who I was up against just had a much better match to suit what the school needs. So I think it's definitely a question to ask at interview, in terms of how much of the different languages you're willing to offer, or could they give you some insight into, how much of one language, how much of another it might be, because again, that might then help to guide whether you continue with the interview or whether you decide to withdraw, and maybe hold back for another dream job that I'm sure is just on the horizon.
Fab, thank you. Well, we've got some great resources, some great ideas that people have used. Phoebe's mentioned the BFI short film in language teaching course.
Fantastic.
Week 1 started yesterday. It's free to sign up. So that's one option there. Tom Sherrington, CPD on Teacher Head, Rose and Shine Principles. It's not MFL, but it's quite general. But somebody's, Jill's here, has heard it's very good. Centre of Excellence had a promotion for CPD courses, including an SEN one for £27 instead of £127 with code UPSKILL. I feel like I'm doing a podcast right now, which may still be on and useful. So do have a look on Centre for Excellence, Centre of Excellence rather, for that. Chartered College is offering great online training. And we've got access to NASBTT online course, CPD courses, and also ordered lots of books on teaching. Signed up to This Is Language, who are offering free access at the moment.
That's very true, they are.
Based on videos and resources like gap fills, all auto-marked and tracked. So some really great resources that people are accessing here, using every bit of time and every bit of what's available here. When adults change, everything changes is a great book I recently read. So we got some book recommendations as well there.
Fantastic. That's great. And the webinar that I mentioned earlier on cultural capital, there were a good few slides available there around all of the different language providers who are offering free support at this time. So if I remember, I will add those to the bottom of my blog post, which again you can find on polyglotlanguages.co.uk. So that will come up on the last slide. So yeah, lots and lots out there. And I think some teachers I know are feeling quite overwhelmed at the moment that, how am I going to manage all this technology? What if we're still using technology to teach in September? I think we just have to take each day at a time at the moment and try not to feel overwhelmed. And I know that's easy for me to say, because I'm much further on in my language teaching career than most of you. But I think, the wisdom I would offer really is, there are all of these brilliant opportunities, but don't say yes to all of them. Think about what your own personal targets and areas for development are, and just pick one or two, and maybe set yourself a timetable like you would if you were in school, and across your day, making time for your assignments, making time for some online webinars, so that you get a little bit of inspiration, a bit of motivation from listening to others. Those of you who are buying language related books, fantastic opportunity to just sit quietly without the distractions of teaching and planning and marking and all of those other things that we have to do when we're in the classroom. So yeah, using your time wisely, but making sure that you have some time for you as well. A bit of soul care is also really important right now.
Fantastic. We've got Michelle's recommended Filter, FILTA, film in language. We've got free/inexpensive courses and fab free resources as well. So some really good access. So every bit of time that you have available now is to be developing yourselves. There seems to be a lot of resources available out there for you all.
Yeah, that's great. And as Cameron said earlier, these ideas and so on will be saved in the chat. So we'll make sure that we download that at the end, so that you've got a record of all the brilliant things that you have contributed. Really appreciate that. We're almost at the end now, so I will take any final questions in just a few minutes. But I thought I would try and list for you some of my preferred teacher blogs, if you like. So there are a list of them there, which I think will probably be more useful to you when I share the actual physical presentation with you. on my website later, and Cam will obviously email that out to you. So there are a couple of my own personal blogs where there are resources galore in a number of languages, so please feel free to steal away. It's good to share, as my granny used to say. There's the Morgan MFL website. I think Danielle has just got a new book out recently, so that might be on some of your reading lists. The wonderful Rachel Hawkes, lots and lots of schemes of work, resources, CPD presentations, and obviously not forgetting the Association for Language Learning, which is as a whole wealth of resources. You've got the website there at the top, which I'm sure you are all more than familiar with, but I was taking a little look around there the other day when I was preparing for today, and there is a specific area for trainee teachers, and then there is a section within that trainee teacher area which is called NQT Year. So again, do take a look at that. There will be some more tips and hints on there just to complement what I've shared with you today. Within that trainee teacher zone, again, just a reminder for those of you who've still got academic assignments to complete, you can access on there their academic research collection, explore different articles focusing on action research. And then remember, there is also the kind of less formal, less academic publication, which is Languages Today, where you are getting the views and resources and opinions of really well-established languages teachers. And again, you can feel free to use those if that helps you to kind of navigate the next few months. I've also been asked by the ALL London branch and Stephen Fawkes from the Association of Language Learning to highlight this recording of a webinar which was for student teachers 2019. I'm not sure what month that was in. Some of you may well have been part of that webinar, but a number of highly regarded speakers. And if you go onto that link, which is the ALL London site, and go to the section where it talks about that webinar for ALL London for student teachers, there is a link there to the recording. So a bit like today, you can access it at your leisure if you wanted to watch it back, if you were there, maybe just a refresher. So that's another good link, and that I think is also teamed up with this brilliant article by Annalise Gordon. Annalise has very kindly given me permission to share that with you on Polyglot Languages. So you've got there top 10 tips for trainee teachers. When I spoke to Annalise about this, she said, "Oh gosh, Susie, it's 9 years old. I'm not sure if is it still relevant?" But I had a really good read of it yesterday, and I think all of the advice, it still very much stands. I don't think much has changed in that time. So do take a look at that. And any further questions, really, and please, there is no such thing as a silly question. I think we've had some really good observations, we've had some really great sharing, so a massive merci, danke, gracias from me. As promised, the email address, so when I say keep in contact, I don't just say that. It's always lovely to hear from fellow languages teachers and enthusiasts. I'm always thrilled to help and support you if I can. And the Polyglot Languages link at the bottom is really the only link you need from today. I'm sure some of you have probably been taking notes as you go along, but I will post the actual presentation on there as well as sharing it with Cameron. And I've also already added onto there the links to the articles and that teacher training booklet from Linguoscope that I mentioned earlier. So I hope you found that useful. So any further questions we've got, Cameron, before we all go off and have our tea? In fact, I think I can hear somebody eating their tea as we speak, because somebody's got their knives and forks clinking away in the background. Have I caught you eating your dinner, Cameron?
It's not me. I'm very jealous.
Someone else.
Just to really reiterate what you said, thank you so much, Susie, for that session. It was absolutely fantastic. There's so many great resources out there. I've seen people mention the Facebook group in here as well. Do make use of that. Granted, not all of you may be on Facebook, but those of you who are, there's that group there just for you scholars, so you can really keep in touch with each other. If after this session you think of any resources which just come to mind after it's finished, drop a post in there, and I'm sure other people will be able to build on that as well and start sharing their resources. But I think creating a community during this period is one of the most important things we all can do. because we all know that we're doing the very best we can in the current situation. And I think that what you're all doing is fantastic work. So these resources here are really just to support you through that process. So keep on at it, give yourself a break, make sure you know that that you're doing the best you can, and try not to add additional pressure to yourself in this time.
Absolutely. I hope that I've managed to allay any kind of nervousness around the whole application process, and just to remind you that there are still lots of jobs out there. So those of you who aren't quite at that point of having secured a post, you know, I really hope and pray that in the coming weeks and months that materializes. And if you would like to email me alongside your tutors, you know, any questions about your letters of application, or if you've got anything that you want to follow up from today's session, please do get in touch, because you know, we're all in this together, and I think you know, we want to support you as best we can to make sure that you not only have a really good teacher training year, albeit in quite challenging circumstances, but that you go on to have a great NQT year, and that you feel like you're part of something much bigger than just your own little languages department, wherever that might be.
Absolutely, absolutely. You couldn't say it better. I think we'll make that the last word, so we end on a real strong high.
Well, thank you, Cameron, for the invitation. It's been great, and thank you to all of you for joining and giving up your late afternoon, evening to join me today. I really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Susie. And I'll make sure to circulate all of this round. Once we've got the recording ready, I'll circulate that with the slides and the chat transcript as well. So we'll be able to get all those resources together. Until then, have a lovely evening, everybody. Take care. Enjoy your tea, who hasn't had their tea yet. And I'm sure we'll all be in touch very soon. Thank you very much again, Susie, and sure we'll be in touch too.
Fantastic. Take care. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.